Mr. President, it's Tuesday afternoon, and usually I come down on the floor of the Senate on Thursday to talk about the individual in Alaska that makes my state such a great place, what we call the Alaskan of the Week. And we haven't been able to do that for a couple of weeks, so I thought I'd just move up the timeline a little bit today and talk a little bit about some people in my state who really have made an incredible difference. It's one of my favorite speeches I give throughout the year, throughout the week, because it talks about people who help their community, help their state, help their country, and oftentimes are not always recognized. So today we are going to talk about two, not one, but two individuals who are our Alaskans of the Week. We actually made our poster board today to be a little bit more specific on what just transpired in our great state a couple weeks ago. The two Alaskans are John Rowan and Aaron Isaacs. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned, we have a beautiful, beautiful, incredible state. And I was reminded again of just how awe-inspiring the great state of Alaska is. I've been home pretty much every weekend this summer, but had the opportunity to visit 12 villages in the western part of our state and was able to meet with my constituents, some of the most generous, resilient, and very importantly, patriotic people in our great nation. John, Rowan, and Aaron Isaacs are part of that tradition. Mr. President, Alaska has more veterans per capita than any state in the country, and Alaska natives serve at higher rates in the military than any other ethnic group in the country. So this is very special patriotism, particularly with regard to the Alaska Native population in our great state. So what have they done? What did John, Rowan, and Aaron Isaacs do? They live in a wonderful community in southeast Alaska, Klawock, and this community now has a 37-foot totem pole dedicated to those who have served our country in the military. That totem pole now stands tall because of the dedication and skill of John, who was the carver, and Mr. Isaacs, a highly respected Alaska Native elder who had the idea and the vision and raised the money to make it happen. So let me talk a little bit about both of these Alaskan patriots. John was raised in Klawock. He was in 8th grade. When he was in 8th grade, he saw an ad featuring a group of men in uniform on Zodiacs at night, recon Marines on a mission, and he was very struck by that. He said he wanted to be a Marine, wanted to be like them. Shortly after he graduated from high school, he contacted a recruiter whose name he still remembers, Gunny Joins, and 2 weeks after graduation in 1982, he left his village to become a United States Marine. 4 years later, he was back home and met his future wife, Patricia. They were soon married, and he and Patricia have been happily married ever since and have raised 2 fine daughters. Along the way, John worked as a logger, then got a job as a janitor in the local high school, and he had a passion for carving. He had a passion for carving. In the Native tradition, carving was something that he had done since he was a child. He continued it throughout his life, and he became the Native arts and teacher and a master carver at his local high school. At about this time, and remember, Mr. President, this was about 30 years ago, he was approached by Mr. Isaacs, who talked to him about his plans to carve a giant totem pole in tribute to our service members. Now, totem poles in Southeast Alaska, Native culture, are revered, and they're often carved and raised in ceremonies commemorating significant people or significant events. They're very, very special. And as you can see in the pictures we have here, this is what they were working on. A Smithsonian researcher once wrote that such totem poles in Alaska are, quote, as beautiful and interesting as the Parthenon of the ancient Greeks. And they are truly awe-inspiring pieces of art and pieces of culture. So, 30 years ago, Mr. Isaacs and John, my fellow brother Marine, talked about this. John liked the idea, but he kind of shrugged it off. He knew all the work that went into building a totem pole. He knew how expensive it was. He didn't know where the funds would come from. But Mr. Isaacs was determined. He had a dream. He had a vision. So Mr. Isaacs, who is now 80 years old, but he doesn't look it, see him in some of these photos, he also grew up in Klawock. His father served in the storied Alaska Territorial Guard during World War II. These were the Alaska Natives who signed up by the thousands to defend Alaska, which a lot of Americans don't realize was actually the site of major battles during World War II against the Japanese. Mr. Isaacs had two brothers who also served in the military, one in the Army, one in the Marine Corps. And in 1961, he was drafted and became a paratrooper in the storied 82nd Airborne Division. So, Mr. President, you're starting to get a sense of what I'm talking about when it comes to Alaska Natives and serving in the military. It's an unbelievable tradition and special patriotism. When Mr. Isaac got back from his duty with the 82nd Airborne, he turned to carpentry, something he was trained in, and he built many of the buildings in Klawock. He married Betty, his wonderful wife, and in October, just next month, they'll be celebrating 52 years of marriage. They raised a family and built a wonderful life. Over the years, he became more involved in helping his fellow veterans. He and a handful of other veterans began talking about this idea, creating a totem pole as a tribute to the so many veterans in Southeast Alaska. He knew that if it was going to be done right, he and the community had to do it themselves. So they began to raise money. 30 years ago, dollar by dollar, quarter by quarter, he held his first fundraising breakfast at his wife's restaurant, where fellow veterans would donate the bacon and eggs and pancake mix. It was slow going, but he didn't stop. Mr. Isaac said, quote, "We had been struggling and struggling, but it was a handful of veterans who kept us going, and we had the vision." He began to put more energy into raising funds. He sent letters. His fundraising efforts began to spread throughout Southeast Alaska. He reached out to companies, corporations, the Department of Defense even. Eventually, his efforts began to pay off. The funds started to come in, and all told, he raised $61,000. It was a labor of love, he said, but I loved every bit of it. Think about that. $61,000, almost over 30 years of fundraising. Talk about perseverance for one idea and vision. So after many setbacks, Mr. Isaacs and the Prince of Wales Veterans Association were able to procure a giant, and I'm talking giant, red cedar tree through the assistance of the U.S. Forest Service, and Alaska Specialty Wood helped to harvest and transport this massive log. John, with the help of his students, got to work on the log. About a year ago, I was in Klawock, and we saw the hard work they were doing. They were carving. It was unbelievable. And when I was invited to come to the raising of this totem pole, I said I wouldn't miss it for the world. So, Mr. President, just 2 weeks ago, in this wonderful town of about 800 people on Alaska's Prince of Wales Island, hundreds gathered after a 3-day ceremony to raise this massive and lovingly carved totem pole that pays homage to our veterans, all of our American veterans. Let me give you just a little description of the totem pole that you're seeing here. At its base is a folded flag, which is a flag that a family receives at a veteran's funeral. When you're going up the totem pole a little bit more, there are 2 soldiers on either side. One is an ancient warrior holding a double-headed dagger and a pick. The other is a 1960s era U.S. Army soldier, complete with a pack of Lucky Strikes tucked in his helmet. Going further up, you can see it here, is the emblem for our POWs and missing in action, military members, and then further up is the insignia for the 5 different branches of the U.S. military, positioned so that you have to walk around the entire totem pole. And at the very top, Mr. President, are an eagle and a raven. Now, of course, there's Alaska Native cultural significance here, but also John, the carver, wanted the eagle and the raven back to back on the totem pole. For the veterans, this is us watching each other's back, he said. Mr. Isaacs praised John's work. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And you get a sense, there's Mr. Isaacs right here, you get a sense just how massive this totem pole is. 37 feet, but several tons. So, Mr. President, it's not easy raising one of these totem poles. You see all the ropes here. It involves ropes and pulleys and dozens of people pulling this giant totem pole up into its place of honor in this wonderful community. Like I mentioned, I had the honor of being there. I also had the honor of bringing our new Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Schultz, with me. We were part of the group. There's the Admiral. There's John, my fellow Marine. There's totem poles being raised. But it was an unbelievable ceremony. Several hundred were there watching something, the vision of which began 30 years ago by 2 veterans who wanted to honor all American veterans. John was there with his wife and his 2 daughters, a master artist, a veteran, a proud Tlingit, an Alaskan, an American, a Marine, filled with gratitude for the part he played in helping Mr. Isaac's dream, a Native elder, an Army veteran, an airborne soldier, helping that vision come true. Mr. Isaac's family was also there with him, including his son, who was a paratrooper in the Army. Again, you get the point. This community is so patriotic, they serve their country generation after generation in the military. I don't care who sees me, Mr. Isaacs told a friend next to him, a Korean War combat veteran. I'm going to cry when that beautiful totem pole goes up. And Mr. President, for all of us, it was very emotional. So I want to once again congratulate John and Aaron Isaacs. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your military service, for your country, for your community, and veterans, not just in Alaska, but veterans all across America. When you come to Alaska, when you come to Southeast Alaska, come to Klawock and see a massive totem pole that these two wonderful men spent 30 years putting together, raised in the honor of every American veteran and military member who has defended freedom in our great nation. I yield the floor.